What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Locked On NFL podcast. Today, we're talking about Ndamukong Suh. We're going to talk about him taking over the narrative, reporting his own scoops, and we'll talk a little bit about where this dude's going to end up because he's not going to be on the Bucs. Plus, we'll talk about some of the head coaches and who of the new head coaches is in the best spot. Let's talk it out here on the Locked On NFL podcast.
You are Locked On NFL, your daily NFL podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to the Locked On NFL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am Luke Braun at Luke Braun NFL. I do Locked On Vikings. I'm here with my good buddy Ross Jackson, who does Locked On Saints at Ross Jackson NOLA. And we'll talk about our Vikings and Saints a little bit, I think, later in the show. But first, let's talk about what's going on in the news, which is never a ton in the middle of June. But we do have one thing. Ndamukong Suh says himself on TV that he is A, not retiring, which we all kind of thought maybe, and B, not returning to the Bucs. So suddenly, intrigue. Now there's a piece of candy, right? Everybody wants a little bit in on it. So the way this broke, though, is very interesting, right, Ross?
Yeah, I think that's like one of my favorite parts about this. I mean, I love that he ruled out the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, which makes perfect sense. We'll talk about that in a second. But the thing that I really take away from this is the fact that we've got players breaking their own news now. Like, he's serving as a guest analyst on ESPN, and he's like, yeah, I think I'm going to play this season, but doesn't look like it's going to be for the Bucs. So I look forward to the opportunities elsewhere. And so I really love
NBA.
That piece. Yeah, right, exactly. I really love that sort of piece of all of this because it's kind of where we are now, right? To where players get the opportunity to break their own news.
Yeah, it's give me the decision style specials for the big free agents, forget this scrolling Twitter and waiting for a Schefter tweet. Get that world out of here, right? Yeah. Get the world where these guys are just glued to their phones trying to be the first person to put out a tweet that may or may not be offensive. Let's get a produce, let's not leak it. Let's make it a reality show. Yep. We'll do it. It reminds me of when Matt Harmon at Yahoo was what team should I be a fan of? And he did a whole reality series, Bachelor style. Right. Give me that. Let's have them go on dates with coaches. Let's televise it. Let's make something out of it. The league's looking to monetize everything now. They're trying to monetize the combine. Monetize this before you monetize the combine. Let's have some fun.
And Ndamukong Suh is actually a great example of that. Remember a couple years ago before he signed with, I believe it was before he went to the Rams, if I remember correctly, he kind of did a little bit of a tour with a bunch of different teams. He and Sean Payton went out to dinner at the world famous Commander's Palace in New Orleans. Hey. He went out to dinner with one of the coaches, I think it was Harbaugh in Baltimore and stuff like that, and then ultimately ended up signing somewhere entirely on a mercenary for hire contract. But it ended up being this big thing where everyone was where in the world is Ndamukong Suh? And they're trying to figure out where he's at. And there was the other time where Jared Cook went for a visit with a team and then disappeared entirely and no one knew where he was for an entire week. He stopped uploading to social media and everything. Everyone was is Jared Cook okay? What's going on? And then he ended up actually signing with the Saints that offseason, but people were terrified for him for a moment, and understandably so. But it is interesting. It's fun to see the players actually being the people that are being the newsmakers and the news breakers in that way.
Yeah, you mentioned that it makes sense that he's not going to be with the Bucs. Outside of your Saints bias, which I figure is playing into this somewhat.
Sure.
What do you mean by that?
You don't have to say that so hatefully, but sure. No, I'm just joking.
I want you to say it more hatefully. We're stoking rivalries in 2022.
I'm all about stoking rivalries. And the Bucs actually are helping to stoke a rivalry with their recent interior defensive line signing of Akiem Hicks. Akiem Hicks, who of course is a former New Orleans Saint and a present guy who likes to growl at players on the field, which is always weird. But he has spent the last
He's
2
horrifying.
years with the It's so
he's
wild.
terrifying dude.
And he's so good. Like, that's the thing is he also lives up to all of it, right? And so if you look at the Chicago Bears, where he has played for the past couple of seasons, you've seen that very closely, Luke, covering the Vikings. And, of course, those two teams playing twice a season. Now, during the time that he's been in Chicago, he's done a lot of talk about the New Orleans Saints. Now he's in the NFC South, signed with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, ready to face the New Orleans Saints twice a season. So I love the idea, personally, of that bias stoking the rivalry one way and then the Saints potentially stoking the rivalry back the other way. So we'll talk about like good fits for Ndamukong Suh in a little bit. Yes, I will bring up the Saints and I'll make my case for him because there is one to be made there. But overall, him completely ruling out the Tampa Bay Buccaneers makes a ton of sense because you look at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers system, what Todd Bowles likes to do. You look at Vita Vea, the other interior defensive lineman that they have, and now the addition of Akiem Hicks. You wonder if there was going to be room for him, even if he was interested in returning to Tampa.
Sure. And here's where my mind kind of immediately went. I was like, why would he say that? You know, because if you're a free agent player, you kind of want to drum up as much interest as possible. You want to say, hey, everybody's interested in me. You know, I've got 3 other teams on the line. You better up your offer. Otherwise, I'm hanging up on you. Like, you'd want to do that. Right. And reading the tea leaves a little bit, going into the irresponsible part of speculation, I wonder if there's a lot of teams. Because if he feels confident enough to be like, nah, it's not the Bucs, that might mean that maybe there's just enough competition. And I appreciate it as an enjoyer of drama and an enjoyer of the sport, knowing information and being like, okay, the Bucs are out. Cool. I like learning that kind of thing and not having to be like speculative and look at what shirt he's wearing on social media. But like from his perspective, that might not be the best thing for his market unless there's so many teams that doesn't matter. And so maybe there is a bigger bidding market than we think. This is a weird time of year where like in May, June, July, we're kind of between the draft and camp. Rosters are mostly complete. And now teams have about 3 months to get really worried about where their roster holes are. And this is where Jadeveon every year, right? I don't know if that gets him more money than he would get if he signed in March or whatever, but this is kind of where maybe you can try to drum up a market for yourself if things didn't go well for you in March, or if you needed some time to decide if you were retiring or not, like with Suh.
Yeah, it's really good business, right? Like making sure that everybody knows, yes, I'm on the market. I'm not returning to my former team and everything, which everyone kind of,
you're right.
Begins a little bit of that speculation of like, oh, well, they're probably just going to go back to their old team and all those other things.
Sure. Now just dispel that.
Yeah.
No, bid on me, please. Yeah, I hear you.
Right. And so now it's like, okay, yeah, he probably has a few teams that are interested in him. There's one that he seemed pretty giddy about when me and Akeem's asked about him. And so I think that, there's like a little bit of that there too, of like, just so everybody knows, I'm not going to about face and go back to my old team. I'm ready for a new contract with a new team and to contribute somewhere else. So let the bidding begin. We're going to talk a little bit more about Ndamukong Suh here in just a sec, where he might end up, and the team that he got a little excited about when me and Akeem's asked him about it during his sort of round of appearances over at ESPN. But before we get to that, we want to tell you about our friends over at BlueNile.com, the place where you can rate all of life's special moments, whether you're creating a custom engagement ring or you're looking for maybe some of those classic timeless pieces to mark any special occasion. Blue Nile has everything that you're looking for, but at a cheaper price than what you're going to find at traditional jewelers. Whether you're ready to pop the question, which I highly recommend taking a look at the gallery collection in particular. I think those rings are absolutely beautiful. Or you're celebrating a milestone moment. You can find jewelry just as unique as the person that you love with the modern convenience of online shopping at BlueNile.com. And you get 24/7 jewelry experts on hand as well to help you make sure you find the right piece that's in your price range, the right piece that you're looking for. Or if she said, hey, I really like a princess cut, and you have no idea what a princess cut is, they'll help you make sure you get the right thing so you don't buy the wrong ring. Make sure you make all of those moments sparkle with jewelry from BlueNile.com. And Locked On Sports listeners get $50 off for purchases $500 or more. This podcast inclusive does include engagement as well. So use promo code Locked On. That's code Locked On. Every delivery, every order is insured. It ships free, and it's delivered in a discreet package so that it doesn't ruin the surprise that's inside. Shop stress-free and find your forever piece over at BlueNile.com today.
So the NBA draft is coming up. And the entire NBA channel is going to be live on draft night. We had so much fun on our draft, on NFL draft night. NBA is doing the same thing. Make sure you go check it out. But for us, let's get a little reckless, right? Let's talk about the idea of Ndamukong Suh to perhaps the Raiders.
It's getting reckless.
So on NFL Live, Ndamukong Suh was a guest analyst on ESPN's NFL Live, and Mina Kimes was talking about possible destinations with him, like right there, like in the conversation. Mm-hmm. And she said, well, what about the Raiders? What about, they've got this, the AFC West is fun to play in. There's a tax situation in Nevada. Starts talking about all these like reasons
Chandler
for
Jones being there. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's an interesting team to be a part of. You get to go chase down Patrick Mahomes all the time. Like, that's pretty fun, right? So when she starts talking about that, the camera cuts to Ndamukong Suh, and he just this wry smile, like almost knowing, and people are going crazy speculating about this. Here's the deal. It probably just sounded like a pretty good idea, and maybe it's one of many destinations that Sue is open to, and that's probably all we can really read into it. But it's as good a reason as any for us to ask the question, what do we think about? Do we agree with Mina? Is this a good idea?
I do. I think that the Raiders would be a fantastic fit for him. And tell me that Ndamukong Suh is not a Raider. Like, think about him in a Raiders
His
uniform.
reputation when he was younger, yeah.
Right. And tell me that he is not somebody that makes sense as a Raider. Like, I think it would be a great fit for him. You've got Max Crosby, you've got Chandler Jones. And I like the observation that he had, too. I mean, this is a guy that's coming off of a Super Bowl team, a Super Bowl roster over the past couple of years with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and before that with the Los Angeles Rams. Mm-hmm. And he talked about how, like, if you come out of the AFC West, that's like a direct track to the Super Bowl, which I think is a really important one. But could they come out of the AFC West? I think is the bigger question. But It's really interesting. I mean, it would be a good fit for him for sure. And he would serve a role where they do need some help on the interior defensive line.
Sure. Like, if you go to the BetOnline odds for AFC winner, I'm pretty sure like 3 of the top 4 are AFC West teams: Chiefs, Broncos, and Chargers. Like, those 3 are all absolutely contender teams. If you could go to the Raiders, and if you, as Ndamukong Suh, think, I could go to the Raiders and turn them into a team that can win that division, and let's say you're right, and you win that division, you just made the Chiefs, Chargers, and Broncos either all play road games, or maybe not even make it at all. But now they're playing road games at best. And now you're the one with the home field, and you just knocked off a whole bunch of contenders, or gave a whole bunch of contenders, saddle them with a disadvantage. I kind of get it where you're coming from there. But I want to put you on the spot, because you said, and a few people in our live chat here, we are live on YouTube, by the way, on the Locked On NFL podcast, so come check that out sometimes. Talking about maybe Ndamukong Suh going to your Saints. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, look, I love the idea. Shout out to Linda and Gary, who both brought this up in the live chat. I think it's a great destination for him. And again, I think that, like, we talked about, like, stoking the rivalry flames with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and Akiem Hicks going to Tampa, and then the Saints basically saying, all right, cool, well, we'll sign your boo over here in New Orleans and then bring him back down here to the Bayou, and then they get to square off. I mean, not directly, but, those two guys get to go at their former teams on the interior defensive line, doing one of the most important things, which is limiting the run game, but also going after the quarterback and all. But I think that you look at the New Orleans Saints and where they're weakest on defense. And right now it's the defensive interior, because it's the biggest question mark. You like what they have at edge rusher, maybe because you have Cam Jordan, who is like consistently going to be a 7.5+ sack guy. He's done it for the past like 10 years in a row. It's kind of wild. And maybe like 8 years in a row. And then you have these young guys in Marcus Davenport, Peyton Turner, Carl Granderson that you're hoping, continue to beef up. And we know that when those guys are healthy and on the field, that they can be impact players, but can they be healthy and on the field? But in the interior, you've got David Onyemata and then a bunch of kind of younger, less proven guys outside of maybe Shai Tuttle. You've seen a couple of free agency additions with guys like Kentavious Street and Jaleel Johnson, but is that enough right now to be more than a rotation? Do you have a bona fide starter next to David Onyemata who could probably stand to improve on some consistency himself as well, or prove some consistency for himself as well. And so I look at Ndamukong Suh as somebody that makes a lot of sense to where he could fit in the scheme, because the Saints are very multiple defense. They play a lot of 4 down, but also 3 down linemen. So they switch up the odd and even fronts, all that. Ndamukong Suh is very accustomed to playing in several different fronts, played in Todd Bowles' system, which is very multiple as well. So the fit makes sense. The need makes sense. I just don't know if the money is going to be there to make sense. The Saints do have salary cap space, believe it or not. They're like $10 million under right now. Like, they have money to spend, and they're eventually going to hand out some extensions here to probably in the next, I would say, like couple of months. That's could potentially end up with some, creating some additional salary cap space. But as of right now, like, I just feel like it would be a good fit in terms of what it is that the Saints need, where they're lacking, where they're weakest, and the role that Ndamukong Suh is going to look for is one that's going to allow him to use that talent he has left in the engine, as he said on ESPN.
That would be fun. I think the Saints defense, I don't know what Dennis Allen is really, if he's changing anything or if he's delegating more and it's going to change in that way or whatever. But I always think of the Saints front as very, I don't want to say like YOLO, but very aggressive, very upfield kind of. Like, and that has always been Ndamukong Suh to me. That very like, just get upfield and penetrate kind of stuff. And there are different defenses. Like, I think that always differ from what I got used to watching with Mike Zimmer in Minnesota, which was very stay in your gap and hold it. And not really sending there would be blitzes and there would be times to deploy it, but it wasn't like, just everybody just chase and everybody just go dominate someone. It was a lot more about being in your spot. And if everybody does that right, the way I've orchestrated it, it'll suffocate. And that was kind of how those run fits work a little bit differently. I can definitely see the fit in terms of like play style a lot, but yeah, of course, always you got to make the money work.
Yeah, I think the other thing that I'll point out too is like the biggest competition to the New Orleans Saints is Tampa Bay, and where you make Tom Brady most uncomfortable is with interior defensive line pressure, interior defensive line rush. And so I think when and so where you're lacking right now is exactly that category. So why not go and grab the guy that can help you bolster it, if you can make it all work. So we'll see. I don't know. We talked about the Raiders and the Saints. Watch them sign with like the Seahawks or something, or end up in Minnesota. Like, I'm sure Minnesota could use a very good interior defensive lineman.
Minnesota's in a weird spot. They could use a guy that would be, well, I guess, they could use like a 4 technique. That's like, like not like a middle clogger type, but I guess Suh could totally be that guy. It's somebody that like in a 4-3 would play 3 technique, and in a 3-4 would play what we would call like end or something. They need like that maybe. But that also is like a smaller role. Like, that's not going to be a role that's going to be on the, like, that guy will probably come off the field a lot unless they come in and they bring in Ndamukong Suh. So I don't see it from Minnesota, but what do I know? I don't know these guys. They're new.
4 tech plays right over the tackle, right? Like face to face with the tackle, a little bit more kind of like run stopper type of role.
Right. Not like the middle guy clogging everything up, but sort of a little further out, trying to be a little bit more of a wrecking ball rather than just an immovable mountain. But speaking of the Saints and the Vikings and the Raiders, they all have new coaches. And let's talk about some of these new coaches and their setups and like who's in the best spot. There was an article from Around the NFL that was like ranking all these guys in the top 10. We figured we'd talk about a few of them.
Yeah, see where we agree, where we disagree. And there's certainly a spot where I disagree. I think somebody should be a little bit higher, but we'll get to that. First, I want to tell you about our friends over at BetOnline. You heard us mention a couple of things about odds in terms of who's going to finish where in the AFC West. You could do that for every single division. You can find where you think every team in each division could potentially end up. Super Bowl favorites. You can even look at end of year awards, including like offensive rookie of the year, defensive rookie of the year, MVP. There's so much, and that's just the NFL. You can also take out a bunch of stuff from the UFC, MMA, boxing, even esports. Like, they've got you covered all across. Make sure you go and check out everything that you need when it comes to all your sports wagering information over at BetOnline. You can find them on your mobile device or wherever, your laptop, whatever it is that you're looking for. They've got you up to date with everything you need when it comes to sports wagering, sports betting, and all of the trends and action. You go and check them out today over at BetOnline, where the game starts.
So around the NFL, Bucky Brooks did a little listicle about where like the best setups, the best situations for head coaches, not necessarily predicting who will be the most successful, but who's the best setup to succeed. So, at the bottom, you got Lovie Smith, who's in the black hole that is Houston. And at the top, you have Todd Bowles, who just inherits like a Super Bowl roster and Tom Brady. And, what more could you ask for? My Vikings are 6th on this list, which when you are quarterbacked by Kirk Cousins, anytime you are in the middle of anything, it's appropriate. I cannot argue with it. I'm not legally allowed to. So you said you had a disagreement with this list. Let's start there. What do you think?
Yeah, so I'll go quickly through the top 5 because this disagreement is in the top 5. So as we mentioned, Todd Bowles, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, number 1. Josh McDaniels of the Las Vegas Raiders, number 2. Dennis Allen of the New Orleans Saints, number 4. Nathaniel Hackett of the Denver Broncos. Dennis Allen was number 3. I forgot how to count. Yeah. Number 4, Nathaniel Hackett of the Denver Broncos. And then number 5, Miami Dolphins head coach biracial king Mike McDaniel. So for me... For me, I actually am surprised that I'm actually a little bit surprised to see Nathaniel Hackett at 4 because I thought he was going to be probably either 2 or 3. I thought he was going to be in the top 3. So it's a small grudge, but it's still a grudge that I have. And it's still a disagreement that I have because I thought that he would be in the when you inherit a Hall of Fame quarterback, that's a pretty good situation to be in. Now, I understand that he kind of, that I understand the order of all of that, but still, he has a very good setup there. He has a very good defense. They're building up over on the offensive side with the weapons, and you have a Hall of Fame quarterback. And he's the only one when it comes to that top 4 outside of course, Todd Bowles, who got the promotion for defensive coordinator to Tampa Bay Buccaneers, that inherits in these scenarios a Hall of Fame quarterback, a bona fide, we know that they will be a Hall of Fame quarterback. And so for me, that is the big piece when I look at like any head coach that's inheriting something. I look at the quarterback first, and I look at what the connection between that coach and quarterback is going to be. And I feel like that's a pretty good match between those two. And so I was surprised to see him outside of the top 3.
Yeah, when I hear like narratives around the Broncos, the biggest one that comes to my mind is, okay, you've got Nathaniel Hackett, he's got Russell Wilson. If this doesn't work out, one of these guys is not all they're cracked up to be, right?
Yeah.
And to me, that like the subtext there is there are no excuses for that not working out because that is a good situation.
Because it's so good,
I mean,
right?
It's in the top half. Like, it's not like he's saying this is a bad situation, but I would definitely switch him with Josh McDaniels, who is
exactly what I thought.
Jumping into a tumultuous organization, and the quarterback's Derek Carr, and they're kind of locked into that. There's not really a lot of room. If you had the opportunity to, let's say Lamar Jackson becomes a free agent, say his contract thing in Baltimore totally falls apart.
Yikes.
That is not a situation that Las Vegas can really jump on because of where they're at with Derek Carr. Like they can't pop in and like they're locked in, and like I see the same thing with my Vikings. If Lamar Jackson becomes a free agent, you're too locked into Kirk Cousins to reasonably go through and hit that. So that's I don't really agree that that's that great of a situation. And you're the worst team in the AFC West. Like, you're the worst roster. It's not a bad roster, but the AFC West is so stacked that, like, I don't agree with that.
Yeah, I've got a hard time with, like, putting a coach that inherits Derek Carr above the coach that inherits Russell Wilson. Like, it's just a strange sort of situation to me. So for me, like, I look at that. Now, okay, we should talk about the teams that we cover as well. Don't get me wrong, but I think Todd Bowles is a definite number 1, though. Like, outside of my grievance in terms of, like, Nathaniel Hackett, like, which other head coach in this situation is inheriting a Super Bowl roster, right? A roster that won a Super Bowl just 2 years ago and everything. And that has, nearly appeared in another and everything. And so I think that Todd Bowles one is easy. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's very like different in terms of what it is that we're accustomed to seeing, that you're like actually picking up that situation, as opposed to usually when you have a team that's getting a new head coach, it's because that team performed poorly the year before. You don't often walk out of an NFC championship and change coaches, right? Obviously, this is a very different situation around the whole Bruce Arians thing and all that stuff. And there's a lot of speculation. It's like what that is, what that wasn't. But, you have a coach that retires, much like with the New Orleans Saints, where you have a coach that retires and it's still actually a pretty successful team. You inherit the better team, as opposed to usually when you're a team that's looking for a new head coach, you're in a situation like the Las Vegas Raiders or the Houston Texans or the Jacksonville Jaguars, to where team was not a good team the year before. Las Vegas Raiders, I'll put an asterisk next to that because they performed actually really well last year with an interim head coach for the majority of it.
Mm-hmm. And that's true. And it's like, again, that's not like a slouch of a team or anything. But here's what I'll say about my guys, my stupid, dumb Vikings. This is a year, and Vikings fans are having trouble with this because we're not used to years like this. This is a year with low expectations for me. Like, we've been throughout our entire history a team that at least tried to be in the conversation every single year, no matter what. But this is very much, we are trying to smoothly do it. You're not blowing it up and rebuilding from scratch and taking 5 years to do it, but they're trying to kind of transition, and they are sort of in the middle of what they used to be and what they're trying to be. And that's going to be an awkward thing, and everybody's learning new terminology, and they're going to be behind in camp and stuff like that, and they're going to be at a disadvantage against everybody else doing that. But that is that's sort of beside the thing. Where, like, look, they've got a roster that is respectable. Everybody expects them to win 8 or 9 games or something. Again, it's Kirk Cousins. It's just what people say about him, and that's the law. So I do get that. I don't know if I would necessarily say that's a worse spot than Miami, but I mean, I'm splitting hairs. And I do think that there's a gigantic drop-off between the Vikings and then the 4 teams below them that are basically Brian Daboll and 3 sitting ducks on absolute trash fire organizations.
Yeah, like let's acknowledge the bottom of the barrel there with those guys actually being there and inheriting guys.
Like, do any of these guys
Daniel
have a shot?
Jones
Like, Lovie Smith is a sacrificial lamb. Doug Peterson is in. I mean, the Jaguars will never do anything right. Sorry, Tony. And Matt Eberflus also seems a little bit like a sacrificial lamb, while Ryan Poles just has absolutely no intention of being good this year. I don't know. Can they be good next year? Like, they've created so many roster holes, and they've basically only fixed their cap and gotten back to neutral water. I don't know. All 3 of those situations just seem like they're setting up their guy to fail. Put him in whatever order you want.
Yeah, absolutely. To quickly talk about the New Orleans Saints and Dennis Allen at number 3 on this list, I think that's an interesting ranking for them. That's one of those guys where I feel like top 5 makes sense to me, but anywhere within 3, 4, or 5 would have made sense to me, because I think that the thing that I'm accustomed to seeing here is that the news around what Dennis Allen inherited is his defense. Right, the defense that he's already coached, the defense that he already knows, defensive players that he already knows all about, all of that. But the big thing in terms of all of the rest of it is that you look at where Dennis Allen is also bringing in guys like Michael Thomas and Jarvis Landry, and then they go out and they draft Chris Olave and they work to build the offense back up and everything. And that's where you end up finding sort of the space where all of a sudden national media is paying attention as opposed to local media. Like, when it comes to a head coach inheriting a defense, that's not going to be your A block, sports segment on a show. You know what I mean? But inheriting Russell Wilson, inheriting Tom Brady, those are going to be those A block things. And I think that who he replaced made a big deal for him too. Right, replacing Sean Payton, that's going to be newsworthy. So the sort of note taking around what he inherited and how he inherited it and his familiarity with it already becomes a big part of why I think he's in that top 3.
There's just something to jumping into an organization that's already kind of built for you, like Sean Payton created something that had a vision and a focus, and that was what it was for so many years, that jumping in and you're just kind of captaining a ship that's already built versus something like what Matt Eberflus is jumping into, where he's basically being given 2 Twix and a roll of duct tape and saying, like, here you go, drive this car. What do you do with that?
He ain't even getting the Twix, bro. He's getting like Rolos.
Hey, no shade on Rolos.
I love Rolos, but you ain't gonna stand on them. Like, you're not gonna. That's not gonna last you. That's not gonna last you. He ain't even getting the Twix, man. He ain't even getting the Twix. He's getting, what is that? What, almond roca. That's what he's getting. He's getting almond roca.
This episode, I think, has reached a point where it's probably best.
You tell me you don't know what I'm saying. You know what I mean? Like, everybody knows what I'm saying when I say he got almond roca. How many of y'all got almond roca? You've been disappointed about it. You're a bunch of mad Eberflusers out there. We feel your pain. We feel your pain.
Oh,
all right, shut me up.
Say that. That's such a, what a cutting tone. Sorry, Lauren. I didn't mean to be that mean. My goodness. I feel bad for the guy. He has to coach for the Bears. What a disaster.
Oh, goodness. All right. Anyway, we appreciate y'all very much for making Locked On NFL your first listen of the day, and I hope you replay the last 2 minutes of this episode over and over and over again so that we're your last of the day as well. Of course, if you're looking for a second listen, you're looking for your next listen, make sure you go and check out your favorite team's podcast. That's not just in the NFL. It's in the NBA, the MLB, the NHL, college. Just search your favorite team name, Locked On, and your favorite team name, and I'll bet you we got you covered. If not, I owe you an almond roca. send me an email. All right, we appreciate y'all very much for being here with us, and we will see y'all again tomorrow. Tony and James got you covered. Luke and I will be back next Tuesday. Remember, we're here with you every Monday through Friday here on the Locked On NFL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.